Hi everyone, this is Dan, the developer of Gravia, and this is the Sprint 5 review video. The main focus of this sprint was on making the black hole and rift forces seem more realistic. In the prototype, it just kind of moved around some of the big objects in the room, mainly related to the puzzles that you were doing, but I really wanted the game to feel a bit more alive, and that means that the gravity of forces will pull other things and potentially destroy the environment and deform it and just make it feel like something's actually happening. So this sprint focused on a few different elements of getting the rifts to interact with other things in the room, and most of these things are not related to gameplay at all. They're just made to make the game a bit more immersive and to make it feel more interesting. So the first thing that I'll show is some lighting effects, and the idea is that not all of the lights in the game are nailed down or stuck to the wall. Some of them are a bit more kind of dynamic. And up here I have some lights on the ceiling, and these are supposed to look kind of like those lights in a school gymnasium, those big dome lights that are suspended from the ceiling. And right now they're just pointing down and they have kind of a spotlight on them. But if I create a rift and it will pull them around, you'll see that they get pulled by the rift forces, and when I let go they start swinging. So this uses some nice bounce lighting effects in Unity for especially if you look in the corners, you can see when the light isn't shining there, it gets nice and dark, and even where the light isn't directly shining, you get some nice reflections. So these won't be used everywhere, but I like the idea of having the Gravia effects alter the lighting of the environment, so it feels like things are actually happening. The next thing, this is just a test room that I'm in, and everything just looks like regular walls in here. However, and if this is kind of to add some secret or interesting environments to the game, there are some times where the wall will not be quite as solid, and as you can see here, the rift pulled some panels off of the wall, and if I put a rift here, it will further continue to destroy that section of the wall. And at this point there's kind of a base material here that can't be destroyed, and now we're in another little room. So the idea is that I want players to feel like they have a lot of impact on the environment, and this is a pretty simple example, but this concept of destroy the rooms that you're in, do things to cause impact on the environment, I think is really kind of an enjoyable experience in a lot of games, and I wanted that in Gravia, especially when you have these tremendously destructive forces at your disposal. And as I rip these blocks out of the wall, they kind of gradually get pulled away, and eventually a bunch of them will pull out. I did some work to get the audio working nicely for each of these, so each one of these little blocks can make some noise as it has collisions, and if you have stereo enabled, you can hear that the collision sounds are coming from the blocks themselves, and as I walk on them and bump into them, they continue to make noise. So then now that there's a bunch of these, it's just all this debris flying around the room. So the debris can be distracting at times, but it also can add some kind of some realism to the game if you're destroying an environment and you have all these chunks of stuff flying around. Okay, the next piece, so that's wall panels that can be destroyed. Kind of the concrete falls apart and breaks apart and can get pulled in. The next thing that I implemented was basic breakable glass. So this is just a couple of glass panels, has kind of a smudgy, dirty texture to it, and I can't get through it or move through it. Normally these would be in a frame of some kind instead of just standing out in the middle of nowhere, but if I hit this with a rift, it will shatter and the pieces will get pulled in. If I didn't let the pieces get pulled in and kind of turn the black hole off really quickly, it just shatters, and now we have these broken shards on the floor. if the player walks over them, they can step on them and break them further. And if these pieces fly up in the air, they shatter when they land. And another thing is the pieces only last a certain amount of time just for performance reasons. Right now they're all here, but if you turn your back on them for long enough, then the pieces will all eventually just kind of go away. So the rift forces will destroy the glass, but they're also prone to destruction from physical forces, like something crashing into them. So I've turned on another piece of glass here, and sometimes it doesn't always happen, just depending on the physics at the time. But you can see there that ripping those blocks off the wall caused them to crash into the glass and destroy the glass. And not all times are the forces strong enough to do it, but in that case, a few hits and it broke. The glass will also fracture first at times. This is pretty strong, but if I trying to get it so that the blocks get pulled off just a bit, but not too strong. There we go. So now the glass is a little bit fractured, and you can see that there are these pieces. It's still solid, and I can't move through it, but another good hit would destroy it. The player can also break the glass if they hit it too hard, so if I put a black hole here and kind of crash into the glass fast enough, you just break right into it. There will be reinforced glass in the game that is not as that is much stronger than this and won't break on impact, and that's for if the glass needs to be more of a barrier. And the last thing to mention on the glass, well, we'll get to that in a second. The next piece of major functionality in this sprint are deformable objects that don't get pulled into the rifts, they don't break, but they do get bent. So this is a steel beam, and it has it's completely solid, so I can't walk through it, but the rift can manipulate it. And there are two versions of this, or two different approaches here. One where the two sides are fixed to the surfaces that they're on, and the other being one side is free. So at this point this is free on the top, and if I put a rift up here, you can see that it starts bending towards the rift, pulling on the closest side first. And I really wanted a feeling in Gravia where you can kind of break the environment. And in this case, bending this steel beam, the beam itself can't be pulled into the rift. There's some materials that just don't get destroyed when they touch a rift, and they actually, in a sense, move the rift out of the way. So you can see this as it's pulling the rift towards it, the rift is actually getting repelled by it. But now I've bent this beam so much, and if I jump just right, I can actually climb up here and move around on it. So this is just one of many types of objects that will be implemented this way, where the rift can be used to deform them, bend them, get them out of the way without necessarily destroying them completely. If I can also set this beam so that it is stuck on both ends, and in that case it bends pretty much the same way, but the top doesn't come free. So it's kind of tethered in place on both sides. And this is maybe for beams that are supporting a room, and they can be bent and stretched, but they don't actually get destroyed, or they don't. It's a little maybe hard to tell, but you can definitely see that this is just bending kind of the near part of the beam, but not pulling it out of its socket. And I'll turn it back into the untethered version. And one other thing with the glass with this is that the forces of things moving into the glass, right now I've just encased this beam in a whole bunch of glass panels, but sometimes depending on the physics, if I put a rift here, the movement of that steel beam passing through it, in that case it's not strong enough on that particular angle. But that beam is putting pressure on the glass as it tries to pull the beam in that direction. So just the physical forces of something else pressing against the glass are enough to shatter it and get it out of the way, which I think is pretty cool. But some angles it doesn't pull quite as hard. It's all based on the physics forces and the collision strength as things crash into other things. One other little piece on the glass, if we go over to a different room here, so in this room I have a piece of glass on the floor here, and the player can fall, and in that case breaks the glass on landing but didn't die. So I have this piece of glass set up just right so that I can fall and land on it and break it, but not actually die from it. If I fall all the way on the floor here, it's fatal. And if I jump as I fall just high enough to kill the player, but they break the glass on the way down. Okay, so that's about it for this sprint. Broken stuff, breakable things, trying to destroy the world that you're in to make Gravia feel even more interesting and realistic. So that's the goal, and there'll be more of this kind of thing as we go. More ways for the player to destroy the environment around them, again, for the sake of it, just because it's enjoyable, and also because it can potentially lead to more secret areas or different parts that you might not have found otherwise. Okay, until next time, thanks guys.